Hi, everyone. I'm sure glad to be here. Thank you so much, Liz. You've been just wonderful. And also, Sharon, what a great home that you share so well. And it's made me feel really welcome here. And Catherine, thank you so much. And I'm really excited that there's such a large group of afterlife studiers or students, because we all have to kind of look at that, don't we? My name is Veronica Entwistle, and I've been an intuitive and energy counselor for probably 40 years. And it's not something one would choose to be. It's something I wrangled with myself in order to become. A lot of you are very intuitive, and I know that. And you probably have, who was it that said that? Can you hear me okay? All right, so I know that we all have our intuitions, but to kind of refine it and get practical about it has a lot to do with your own personality. I notice there's a lot of us that are Geminis here, but I have this insatiable curiosity about life and where it goes and what is God and what is life all about? What's the meaning of your life and what is the meaning of my life? And so through the years, as I've done readings for people, I have found over and over again that this is jumping around a bit, but you'll see the connection. Over and over again, I have found that it's not about predictions. It's about you and I taking charge of some amazing kind of powers, we'll call them powers, inside of ourselves that can wend our way through a whole bunch of predictions and create more of the reality that you want. I'm going to take my shoes off. I hope you don't mind. That's me creating my reality of comfort, right? And so what I had when I was little, I had a lot of experiences where my mom was young. They were Catholic. We had a lot of kids, no money. And one of those stories, you've heard those stories over and over, I'm sure. And I was a different kid. I was the one that worried her. Before I could walk, I would talk in full sentences, tell her how she was feeling, and all she did was cry and worry about who was going to cart me away next, But I found, because I remembered where I'd been before, which links us to life after life, I found that one of my greatest solaces or my greatest research lab, when I was like 3 or something, I don't know exactly what age, but I was pretty young, it was preschool. I used to go and sit in this ditch outside our house in Vancouver, BC. And in that ditch, and this was pre-television, because I am more than 25, but I used to be able to kind of turn a knob inside myself and tune in all kinds of information from those lives, or that life, I'll say. And how it looked was interesting, because it was like big blobs. I kind of described them as floating membrane-filled blobs of color with a radiance that is way beyond what you get in third dimension, like a radiance that when I tried to replicate with my crayons was absolutely impossible. And I used to know when this, for example, turquoise blue, I love turquoise, but turquoise blue blob came by, I felt so incredibly loved. I didn't feel wrong. I felt, there's my, I don't know, mom, there's my womb, there's something, right? So I had a lot of that kind of thing going on, which is kind of a predicator for wanting to examine, where did that come from? Now, I learned, like many people, that if you're not careful when you're a kid, at least in the olden days, that they could get really scared and you can get into big trouble. And I went to Catholic school, and the great thing about that is we learned a lot. And the other great thing about that is we talked a lot about angels, saints, spirits. Now, they didn't know what I was going to do with it, did they? But still, we were really cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of beings out there that you can talk to. So, of course, I turned that into my job, right? And as I talked to people, well, let me see, I'll fast forward into when I was young, I suppressed all kinds of things, which I've already said. And then I was quite young, and I married my sweetheart, which we often do. And after we were 60s radicals, we did an awful lot of like revolutionary stuff. He was absolutely brilliant. He's got his PhD in biophysics and so on. And we were always kind of doing anti-war rallies and those other things. Any of you that had lived through the 60s probably remember a lot of that. We were really vivid activists. And I used to say to him, but I want to be really spiritual. I want to explore metaphysics, or we called it spirituality in those days. And he'd say, well, all of that's well and good, but you got to get out there and you got to get your hip waders on and get into the political world before you can do something that impractical. Oh, so that word practical has to be, I'm often thinking as I get older, we got an interesting glossary back here, don't we? We need to look at the meanings of those words. But anyway, long and the short of it is, after we really wended our way through the 60s and through some community development work in a slum in northern BC, which was like Peace Corps, only it was internal in Canada. And so we lived as educated people with lots of possibility for $200 a month and helped people. And that was really a good experience for us. And after that, he got frustrated because he said, we have no power there. Duh. And he got involved in big political stuff. And then he got really frustrated because there's no power there, right? Because there's a whole bunch of machine running. He'd say the machine is running things. I don't know what to do here. So he became a union organizer, but he also became ill with testicle cancer. And for 16 months, his denouement was very dramatic. He not only got sicker and chemo and all that stuff, but he ran around with women from my consciousness raising group. And then he came home to die at 33. And all of that was really horrible, but you know the really good thing about it? Is it tore my life up so that everything I was clinging to, everything I really believed in, was gone, eh? And I know some of you have been through that kind of thing, haven't you? And so I kind of was crazy for a while, nervous, pick a thing, anything. And he used to come visit me from the other side. And I'd say, go to the light, go on, go to the light. You caused enough trouble here. I'm just trying to recover, right? And we were very funny together, another Gemini, right? And we would laugh across the veil. I mean, I had no question that it was him. It looked like him, sounded like him, acted like him. And I was mad at him, so we argued through the veil. Go away, I'd say, go away. After about 3 years, I started to talk to him, right? It took me quite a while. But he had lots and lots to say. He didn't believe in emotions. He didn't believe in spirituality. He didn't believe in all of those things. But as I progressed, and my way of progressing through my madness or craziness or nervous breakthrough, whatever we want to call it, I like nervous breakthrough because a lot of us have been through those, haven't we? I progressed by studying nutrition, by meditating, by reading everything metaphysical, spiritual I was attracted to. And I was funny in those days. I would open a book, like this, and I would go like this, and I'd go, doesn't feel like it's got the energy, so I wouldn't buy the book. So I was an interesting character in a bookstore. So if you said, well, this book is the best in the world, I'd open it. And if it had the energy, which some of them do, I mean, I can remember standing in a bookstore talking to people and putting my hand up like this and going, oh my gosh, what's that? And you've all heard about a book falling off a shelf or something like that. Well, so I'd grab it and go, wow, this book is just zzz. So that's how I got my guidance through my education. And my husband, my dearly departed, not so dearly departed, became dearer as we went through these, because we had been very close, But in any case, sometimes you're separated from the people that you love because of good things. If I had stayed really attached to him, who knows what would have happened, right? Who knows where I would have been? Not that I'm at the epitome of everything, but I'm sure fulfilled a lot of the time. So anyway, he kept coming and saying, I'm really excited for you. You're doing really well. I go, really? And I developed... I didn't call him in because as a Catholic, I had been taught you talk to spirits, but you don't call on them because they have a journey. And if you call them in, they won't be on their path. So I didn't ever call him in until I met another person who was very high on that level. And she said, no, that's just to keep us in line. You can call them in. But anyway, I never called him in. He showed up a lot. And we laughed a lot through the years. And I became, let me see, what did I become? I got married again. I had a child. And we moved a lot. I had moved a lot with him, and I moved a lot with his second husband, who was in aircraft. But all the way along, I was putting things on my resume, stuff that I was trying to learn. I was already a school teacher, and I was adding more about metaphysics and consciousness and so on, and radio. I went back to university in Pennsylvania, because as a Canadian, I couldn't work in this country, but my husband at the time was eager to be in America. He was a Brit. Enough said about all that. But in any case, in Pennsylvania, I went on to one of those distant learning things and finished my degree. I was missing it by 2 courses, but by that time I needed a year and a half. You know how it works, elongating. Reminds me of the Roadrunner cartoons, The distance gets wider and you have to jump harder. Anyway, so I got my degree in radio communications and education. And guess what? I became a radio. I started channeling at that point. So it's really weird. I got the degree. I did all kinds of little radio things, and I had 3 internships in radio stations. And you don't really make money in radio. I don't know if you know this, unless you're on the commercial end of things. At least this was my experience. But what happened is I started to channel, and I really questioned a lot of that, because I'm like that. I'm like, okay, show me that this is real. Show me it's truthful, that I'm not going to hurt people, that sort of thing. And people started coming. I can't believe it. I look back and I go, how did that happen? People just started to be drawn to me. And for $30, I would do a reading for someone. Now, fast forward into the afterlife business. One of the first people that I worked with came every week for a while. She was a detective living in Pennsylvania near Philadelphia. And she was pretty anxious because her sister had killed herself 15 years earlier. She says, can you find her? Well, lo and behold, I did my friends call it your woo-woo. I did my woo-woo, and and there she was, this being 15 years later, and she was rolling around in this kind of gray fog. Now that was interesting. We both cried. I always get emotional with the people on the other side, because to me, that's what makes them real. I feel their feelings. In one case, I was all like this with one woman and found out she had died of MS 25 years earlier. So there's energy. I love energy. And there's something about energy that scientifically, whatever that word means, explains the feelings that we have and what you and I transmit to one another, and sometimes we're congested by. Anyway, long and the short, this sweet person who had been so depressed and who had ended her own life, as we talked to her, she started, and remember, I'd been raised Catholic, which we always prayed for the dead. Well, don't underestimate the value of that. It makes a huge difference. Because this woman and I sat there and talked to her sister and explained to her sister that she could wake up, that there are beings around her, that it wasn't hopeless. Pick all the things you might say to somebody if you felt like they had access within them, right? And this woman on the other side, how we perceived her, my client in her feelings, me in my sight and feelings, this woman got brighter and brighter every week. And she talked to her each day in the middle of all her work schedule and so on. And it was so brilliant for me. I'm going, it's true. We should pray for the dead. I mean, that was a wonderful discovery for me. And I'll just go through a few more of these things. There's another woman who was there for a session. I'd already moved on. I was living in a different little town at this point on the Olympic Peninsula. And there was another woman who was very, very successful as a realtor and so on. And she used to come regularly for sessions because she was trying to grow spiritually. And growing spiritually means, from my perspective, is finding a lot of your gifts and finding out what blocks them. And what blocks them can quite often be your interest in remaining in the status quo, or your being afflicted by somebody else's opinion of you, which we all have, right? So at the very end of really what I thought was a wonderful reading with this woman, I said, wait, there's somebody here. And it was her mom. And I said, it's your mom, Maria. She just freaked out. She's crying and sobbing. And her mother had killed herself when my client was, I think, 13 or something, one of those ages that, well, all ages are really significant, but this was very, very significant. And the father had gone off the rails and things just got really awful. Anyway, the long and the short of that one is that as we spoke to her mother, I was crying, she was crying, the mother was crying. The mother was waking up, and it had been like 20 years or something. And as the mother was waking up, her heart was breaking for her children, but she could not feel that when she was alive. You understand that? If you're going through a heck of a lot of stuff and you have to work a lot, you can't really sit around and really be in every intimate feeling of your children sometimes, especially if nobody did that for you. Guess what? Whatever we have, we pass on. But what happened was there was kind of a rebirth in this girl and also in her sister. They began to awaken to who they were. Sometimes when we talk about pathology, narcissism, or any of these things that are really heavy-duty psychological analyses, you can feel in these people that they're very often cold where somebody else might be compassionate, right? And to me, the coldness, if it's in me or other people, represents how we stifle any reactions to prevent ourselves from coming undone or to be too vulnerable, right? So the coldness is in these girls, and the tendency to act out and react to things kind of melted. So you can see they begin a whole different way of having a rapport with people. But what I like the most about this kind of work, and you can say it's just your imagination, maybe, I think imagination is a higher level than thought anyway, right? So if you get into your imagination and see, like, if I was a real jerk and I had imposed my jerkiness on you as my child, and I'm dead, whatever that means, and then you and I can somehow talk about it and resolve it, won't I change radically? But also, won't the one on the other side change radically as well? Because it doesn't stop. My experience is it doesn't stop. If you are suicided, like some of these people that I've worked with, and I've worked with many more than that, it doesn't stop. If you think you don't want to live, so everything's going to be over, you can lie there in a gray fog or whatever and have it all over until you wake up, right? And when you start waking up, you do the learning, right? You start to do the learning. And in that learning, my belief is, and you can always argue with me in beliefs, because I believe we're caged by our beliefs a lot of the times. I like the beliefs to be moved so we can spiral up through them and become more and more of who we really are, right? I forget where I was going with that. But in any case, one of the things I learned to do to stabilize my vision, because the hardest thing for me in life was the fact that my visions used to hit me unannounced. Or say I'm looking at you and I think you're a nice person and so on. And all of a sudden your face gets these gray shades over it. And my mother would say, they're going to lock you up, right? She said that for years, right? So I was afraid about who I was for probably till I got married, That was a protection for a while. And those gray shades, in retrospect, told me a whole lot. It meant that part of me was trying to see who you were. So I'm looking at you, and you turn into an indigenous old woman, or you turn into a young girl who's tap dancing on a stage or something. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to be in big trouble here. Somebody's going to lock me up for sure, And so I began to learn that if I did the nutrition, because if you have visions out of control, check your blood sugar. You can stimulate visions by just screwing up your blood sugar. I don't know if you know that. Now, half the country is diabetic right now, so I'm going, okay. So we got lots of screwed up visioning going on. Don't tell anybody I said that. They'll think I'm nuts, right? Anyway, so I learned through all my studies, my personally driven studies, to do a lot of breathing, yoga, meditation. Whenever I get really goofy in the visual doodah, I learned to do a chaotic meditation. Do any of you know what that is? Okay, it's just a dance. I still use Van Morrison to it, so I don't have fancy music of any sort. I learned that for 20 minutes a day, if I dance like a wild woman, I probably look like a noodle, but inside I'm very busy. And I run the chakras, and I get my vibrating, spiraling lights running up through my body and reach out and then back down. I can not control the visions, but I can consciously call them in. So the dance is to clear everything, to energize my body and my chakras. And then at the end, I can call in. You see the difference? Instead of just being victimized according to what I've had for breakfast or something like that, right? But it's a gift to be able to work with our vibrational sensitivities. It's really quite a powerful gift. And everybody, I'd say just about everybody in here can do that. And so I learned to do the dance because I don't have an outfit, a schedule. If I'm on the road, which I've often been in my work, I can do it in a bathroom somewhere. I don't have to have the right place. Anyway, as I did this dance, I was studying, as I said, radio and finishing a degree. I had my studio, or my study area, was down in the basement of this townhouse. My husband was an engineer, and he was very tolerant of this, and I had a 2-year-old who became 3 before I graduated. But I would go downstairs with all my paperwork and my funny old typewriter, because we didn't have computers yet, and I would do my wild dance, Van Morrison at the helm, just boogieing like mad and breathing and chanting sometimes. Sometimes my daughter would join me. And what happened is I started to perceive, as I cleared, I started perceiving these huge vaulted, geometric shaped, like rooms or temples or whatever you want to call them. So here I am in the rafters and the laundry and the big piles of paper and all that. You know, it's not elegant. But what was elegant was in my visions. I loved it. And I learned to talk to some of my guides that way. I met some very profound guides. Even one day where it was almost like there was a drum roll in my head and the Buddha came up at the end. And I'm cheeky enough to go, yeah, right, I wonder about this. You know, here I am in the basement. But there was a lot of very transcendent information going on there. And then in would come my husband, my first husband, my dearly departed. He was getting dearly by then. And I'm just boogieing like mad. And we both had fairly big teeth. And he would face me and match me and tease me. And I'd say, go away, because my daughter's sleeping right now and I only have this long to be able to do this. And he would just laugh. Anyway, long and the short of it is, as I moved through the visions and saw more and more of this transcendent geometric stuff, he dancing beside me, I'm ignoring him now, right? He's dancing beside me, and all of a sudden I see that he and I share some of the same guides. Not all of them. I could see the distinct departure of our paths, but also I could see what we had in common in terms of vibrational information. That to me is still exciting. Because when we talk about afterlife, like he said, there's no such thing as RIP, so don't get comfortable, right? And fortunately, he was funny. He would always crack me up as he said these things. And so he's taught me a great deal from that side. And he doesn't remain my guide. He's not that egocentric. My guides are my guides. And the ones that I adhered to at that phase moved away, so that as I raised my fields and frequency, I would have a new stable of guides, okay? And it just kept growing and growing like this. And he was very excited for me and also for him. And then he said goodbye because I'm going to be born. This man did not approve of emotions, period. So he said, I'm going to be born now. I'm going into the body of a little boy in Idaho who's very emotional. So I giggled because I thought that was pretty funny. If you put that in a cartoon or a script, it's pretty funny. And I didn't see him anymore, you know. But, well, he's popped in and out, and you'll hear that in a minute. So one of the things that happened in that basement that was really funny, because I've been studying enough metaphysics to know you don't want to bring in dark spirits. So if you're going to channel, you're playing with danger if you don't clear yourself out, right? If you don't clear yourself out, you see through cluttered filters, do you not? And if you have designs, like I want it to be this way, it's going to have a certain kind of effect on what you're seeing, right? So one thing I learned right away was that if you have to, excuse the word, this is a nasty word, if you have to poop, your visions are going to be darker. So if I get darker visions, guess what? I check my intestinal tract first and foremost. And I always learn on this chakra level that this is everybody else's influence. So you're standing in the back of your own womb saying, who am I in the middle of all this? And the purpose of life is to give birth to your real self. Now that might be lifetimes long, but in any case, one day I'm downstairs doing my stuff and this fellow shows up. He's absolutely interesting, but he scared me because I was afraid of the light. And not the light. I was afraid of interfering with the light. I was afraid I was fiddling with dark stuff, right? So this guy looks like he's got, you know what the curved horns on a goat are like? His face was sort of all of a leathery nature, and that shape was part of his bone structure, okay? And he had this he was really kind of cute, actually. But because he was so odd looking, I thought, oh dear, am I playing with something demonic here? And I was really worried. So I did my usual routine, go to the light, go to the light. And he's holding this amazing, now this is 1994. So he's holding an amazing portable radio piece, which has automatic editing, recording, blah, blah, blah. In those days, we didn't have that. I was cutting and splicing tape on reels at that point. So he's got this absolutely stunning piece of vehicle of radio transmission, and I want that, but I don't want to be in the dark. So I'm like, he said, what is the matter with you? Why are you trying to get rid of me? And I said, well, you look pretty scary to me. And he said, you don't look so hot to me either. And what I learned from him is he just wanted to know what I was doing and what other people on my planetary existence were doing with media stuff. That's all he wanted to know, apparently. But in my fear is a funny thing, isn't it? In my fear, I got rid of him because you can do that, if something's dark. And every now and then I go, his name was Ruar, I think, Ruar, something sort of oddly sibilant, or that sound that kind of flowed into what you don't know. So every now and then I go, I wish he'd come back because I could ask him so many questions and I could share a lot with him about what was going on. So that was that little case. And let's see now. Fast forward, my mom, who thought I was a little bit difficult, right? She died, and she got more at peace with me that I was finally doing something that she could admire because she had friends who came to see me and so on. But she died at 74, which is pretty young in my viewpoint of life these days. And she was always really angry and difficult and died of heart things. So there's no accident there, is there? She was pretty sensitive and vulnerable and refusing to be sensitive. So there you have it. And so she passed, and she would come to see me. And she would say, one day she came to see me and she said, Ronnie, please call your dad and tell him blah, blah, blah. She had messages for him. I said, sure, Mom, I'll do that. And then she said, and I've told you, you would make more money if you went back to teaching, and you never listened to me, and blah, 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 blah. So I said, well, guess what? I'm not taking your calls anymore, Mom. But I did learn something interesting, which is I could take her calls for my dad and block her for me, right? I don't know how I did that. There's something kind of interestingly magical about all that. So I would listen to her, and one time she came to me and she was crying her heart out. And I said, Mom, what's going on out there? I'm going, what's happening over there? It's supposed to be all peace, isn't it? I said, what's going on out there? And she said, I asked you to call your father and you didn't. I said, oh, Mom, he's going to be mad at me. And I go, well, I guess he's always mad at me. Okay, I'll do it. So I phoned my dad and I told him what she had said to pass on to him. And he, who didn't think much of what I do. Now, he was an optometrist, and how I see things is not his favorite thing, right? He was also diabetic. So he got some, little trails in there that might have some sense to it. But in any case, I called my dad and I told him I didn't mind if he got mad or not, because I'm not going to not do my work because somebody doesn't like it. I'm sorry, I just don't have time for that in my life. I do try to purify, right? So anyway, I told Dad what Mom had said, and he said, I'm so relieved to hear from her. And I said, and she said, Dad, you're going to marry again. And he said, are you kidding? She was the most jealous woman I ever met. And I said, but she said she's over that. So she wants you to be happy, and she's pleased you're going to marry again. And he goes, yeah, right. Well, I'm not going. My dad's very funny and quite quippy with his language. So he says, yeah, right. Well, I'm not going to do that. Well, a couple of years later, he meets a woman who's in his neighborhood. He's in a beautiful community. And he meets this woman who's she's a Christian Scientist, actually. And she said to my dad, she said, Grant, I've seen you in my visions. And this is what my dad did. He goes, gives you an idea, right? Anyway, he ended up marrying her. Because she just wooed him in. I loved her, because when I came to Vancouver to visit the family, she was at the head of the house. And we'd sit and go through magazines and discuss mind over matter and all. I didn't have to be a Christian Scientist or a Catholic or a peanut butter sandwich, nothing, just getting into the subject, I loved her. Anyway, subsequently she passed, and it was really sad, and my dad read all of her books to see if he could understand when she was ill. And they had grown to love each other after 5 years of marriage or whatever it was. I really liked her. And she had something that she couldn't transcend with her stuff. But my dad read all her stuff and he goes, oh, it's old-fashioned science. I don't know. But anyway, she died, and that was really heartbreaking for him. And she didn't believe in what I did, but she did, meaning, yeah, she would ask for information and then we would argue about it, which I really like with people because I'm very smart too. You don't want to be led by the nose up and down somebody else's belief structure, so you take your Kool-Aid and all the rest of it. We all know about that. So she passed, and I was at a big, and my dad was really a mess for a while. He was very, very fragile, very broken down, because he was really enjoying his new, what would I call it? A new level of love for her, a new level of himself that he shared in love. And we all want that. Yeah, I don't want to be the same as I was 20 years ago. Good grief. And anyway, so she died. And one time I was at a Lazarus seminar, which I don't know if you all know that, but they're a channeled entity. And I'm at this seminar. We're really learning a lot. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, my stepmother, Georgina, lands in front of me. I call it my see-through friends, because a lot of times when they visit, you can see right through them. And there she was, and I said, wow, Georgina. She said, I have to talk to you. I said, Georgina, you don't believe in this, so you better give me some signs. And all of a sudden, you know how each and every one of us has a certain scent, right? It's not a smell. It's like you can recognize some people when they come in the room because of a certain scent. All of a sudden, this little area in which a big crowded room with a lot of people in it, I could smell her. I said, okay. And she said, please call your dad. He needs you right now. I said, okay, this is right in the heart of some pretty interesting stuff. So I said, okay, I'm happy to call my dad, but does it have to be right now? Can I wait till coffee break? She said, yeah, but don't wait very long. So coffee break came, and I shot over to the hotel, and I phoned my dad. And he said, oh, Ronnie, I thought you were away. I thought you were at a seminar. I said, I am. But Georgita just came. And he goes, oh, he starts sobbing on the phone. And he said, I don't know what's wrong. I'm such a mess. And I said, well, she told me that. And he said, oh, thank heaven, because he started to feel like he was still in rapport with her, right? And she explained a lot of things that he was going through. And he got really calm. And I came back in. And I asked her, what's going on for her? She said, I'm learning so much. I can't tell you. It's so brilliant, right? So that was enough for me. There was more, but you don't need to hear more right now. That's a good thumbnail. And so as time went on, my mother, who I had pushed away, as you know, from my sake, 17 years after Mom died, I'm editing this radically, as you can tell. 17 years after my mom died, I'm in the kitchen chopping veggies. I love vegetables. I'm a veggie nut. And on the right side, I can see in the place where I'm living, my home at the time, this big expanse of apple trees full of fruit and so on. And on the left side, there's the bay, the ocean, up in Bellingham, Washington. It was a beautiful day. It was May. Chop, 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 chop. And around the corner comes this huge ball of light. And most of it's pink. Now, how do you know when you're having a vision what they mean? I don't know, but you do. And I said, oh my gosh, Mom, is that you? And she said, it is. And I started to cry because it was profound, when you're really touched by something. So, 1 minute. So she started to say, I want you to know that I have broken through a barrier I had against love. I had it my whole life, and I'm very, very sorry. She said, now I see who you are. I love you so much, and I couldn't say that before because it wasn't available to me. And she said, I'm really proud of what you're doing, and you're very courageous. And she had never liked my daughter right from the get-go, and she made that clear. She said, and I see your daughter is kind of like you, and she is an amazing person, and I want you to call her and tell her that, and that her son is also a wonderful person. His great-Grammy loves him very much. And even I could cry as I tell you that. I get goosebumps. But it was really educational, So then she said, please call your father. I get that a lot, don't I? And it was the day before Mother's Day. So Mother's Day, I called him and I said, hey, Dad, happy Mother's Day. And he goes, oh, yeah, right. This is the same guy that would go like this. And and I said, I just heard from Mom. And he said, oh, what'd she say? And I realized later he had a whole file folder of things that I had sent him, And that's really nice because this is a man who did not believe in life after death, period, right? So Mom said to tell him about her breaking through this filter she had against love, or this barrier against love. And then she, where was I going with that? She also told me to tell him that he had been a very good husband. Now, they'd had to get married at 20. And with 3 little girls, my dad worked for Safeway in these various places, and then he took off and went to university for 5 years. So he brought her a lifestyle that was amazing under some pretty terrific odds. And she was always mad at him. So she said to him, you were an amazing and wonderful husband, and you have to know that. And he cried. He was always crying for me, which if you knew my dad, he doesn't cry, right? But anyway, he was crying away and said, she knows, doesn't she? And I said, what? And he said, I've been pacing the floor every night this week, wondering if I had been a terrible husband. And he said, she was always mad. And I said, Dad, she broke through. And Dad said, is that how it works over there? I said, I really don't know, but that's what I'm hearing, right? So we had a wonderful conversation from that. And ages later, he'd say to me, he'd say, that changed my whole life. It changed his whole history, if you know what I mean. And when we can change our history, we do change our well-being. Anyway, my dad lived for a few more years, and he was a character. He died at 93, and he had taught us all to sing. The greatest thing about my family is we all sing and sang harmony. Even when all three of us girls were in the same bathtub, he taught us to sing 3-part harmony, which gives you the idea. And as he was nearing his passing, because he used to say to me, there's nothing out there. And as he was nearing his passing, he would argue with me, and then he'd ask questions, and he'd argue, right? Anyway, just before he died, we all assembled into his room. By this time, there's 4 of us. We all assembled into his little room, and we started singing all the songs he taught us from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. He didn't like the songs from the 60s. He was clear about that. But anyway, we did a 2-hour concert, and he started off sitting like this, with his head hanging over the side of his wheelchair. And my dad was not a wheelchair kind of person until the very end. But his head was hanging over the side, and then all of a sudden he was going, boom, 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 boom. And we all had our little iPhones with recordings, so it was really touching. It really hit him. I said, this is your legacy to us, Dad. Thank you for that. And it really affected him. I know it did. So a few days later, I went in to see him in his little room, and I thought, oh, he's got so much energy. He was very handsome, strong-looking, my dad. And I could see him lying there, and I thought, he's still really strong. He's not going to pass quite yet. Next morning, that was a Friday, and the next morning, I'm lying in bed. I'm like an hour away from him, or a half hour away. Lying in bed, and I woke up around 7 o'clock, and my dad came flying into the room. It was wonderful. He just came flying around the corner. And, well, he's funny. My dad was a performer, right? So anyway, he came flying around the corner, and he said to me, I've decided to go now. I'm going now. I said, okay. I don't know if I'm making it up or if it's real, but this is my experience. So then he comes around the corner, and then he enters a tunnel. And the tunnel is brilliantly gold. But guess what? It looks like a big slinky. You know what a slinky is? Big, okay. Well, that would be my dad. He's being funny, right? So he goes through this tunnel, and he's bouncing from side to side as he goes all the way through it with my mom and Georgina and his mother, who we all just adored. She was just a really fun character. And they're all waiting for him to come. And he bounced from side to side in this tunnel in a really funny way. And at the very end, he jumps out and he goes, I made it. Then he shot by these people. I'm going, well, this is all very interesting. Did I actually see that? I think so. So I thought, well, I'll just meditate and get clear here. And I thought, well, shall I call my sisters who think I'm a little bit of a Fruit Loop here? And I didn't, but the phone rang. Ding. It was my older sister saying, Dad just passed. I went, okay, good. And I didn't tell them what I had experienced. Excuse me for a moment. Because, you know, some of it is really sacred, and you don't want to tell the wrong people. Not because I'm ashamed or anything. I just don't want to denigrate what's going on. So a while later, he kept coming to me and saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm like, I mean, I was the difficult kid. I was the kid he'd say, you will conform. Guess what? I couldn't have. Not to save my life, actually. A little bit. I'd get my hair done. But you know what I mean? I just couldn't. So anyway, later he'd say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I thought, well, that surprised me. So I said, why are you saying thank you so much, Dad? And he said, you told me to keep my eyes open. I did, and it's so wonderful. He says, I'm having such a great time. I'm learning so much. He sounded like Georgina. So we're nearing the hour here, but I cannot tell you how many other situations I've seen. Those are all personally. Oh, I have one more that the guys are going, wait a minute. I have a number of clients who are deceased because of drug overdoses. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah. And one family that I was working with, the daughter was very, very ill. She had autoimmune illness. She was 15, and she was a brilliant athlete and student, and she couldn't function anymore. So when I got to know her, she was in her 20s, and we just worked and worked energetically to get her to either try to heal or tap some of the resources within herself so she could have a life. And we were doing okay. Now, the mother's an artist, and her father, because she was going through some very paranoid times, was such a good dad, he would sleep on the floor outside her room because she was afraid at night. Her brother was off running around doing terrible things, music and drugs and so on. So there was the family. Well, shortly after I got involved with the parents of the family, the father died. And I thought, oh, that's hard for the mom. She's got an autoimmune child and a kid out on the lam. Anyway, what happened after that, I didn't know how she was going to recover from that. And then what happened is her son overdosed and he died. And I remember talking to her on the phone. I'm like, we couldn't talk. We both just sat and cried, like, how do you pick up, she's an artist, right? How do you pick up the pieces? So the long and the short of that one is really brilliant. Is her son came to me as I was speaking to his mom, and he said, Mom, finally I'm employed. And what happened is he was explaining how there's a number of spirits that he's involved in who work with young people who are stuck in the drug thing. And they have learned a technique for working with the brain patterns. This is from the other side. Working with the brain patterns to help extricate these kids from the incredible traps that they're in. Now his sister, because she'd had many, many years of incredible pain, you know what she's on? Oxycontin or Cotin or whichever one it is that's so devastating. So I don't know how she's ever going to get off that, right? But she was very close to her brother and extremely devastated. But he started to work with her. And suddenly she was totally off all medications, A. B, she was getting better. And they were working together. And they didn't stay working together because I think there's always a problem if you're attached at that level. But he unhooked her. She unhooked a few other people as she went by. But the thing I really love is to know that on that side, there's a lot of action that you and I are going to pass through. But if you've got some issues with people, or if you're attached to people here because of things that you did wrong or they did wrong or all of you did wrong or something you were caught up in, it is very possible to speak with people on the other side and unhook those energy knots between us that, one way of putting it, can increase our karmic edicts, if you will, where you have to live through this much trauma with these people because you're still stuck together in bondage. We don't have to be in bondage is what I'm learning. You can literally unhook each other by becoming aware of where the hookups are. And truly, when you communicate across the barriers, you want to communicate energetically. So if I'm really mad at one of you, which I'm not, but if I'm really mad at you, Catherine, I'll pick on you, and it's affecting you here or here, right? And if I say, oh, I see what I did, and I know how you feel, and you say, yeah, and I felt blah, 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 and you can see my sincerity, you can usually feel a sincerity. You and I might, and this is silly, but it's true, might burp, because it'll unravel something in the subconscious area of the body or your grief. And a lot of babies are born in grief, aren't they? A lot of babies have tremendous grief at birth. And if you can see the colors of it in their chests. But I'm saying if you pay attention and you listen, or if you have some bitterness with someone and you can really get right in there and express it to them, you can unhook each other so that person gets to move farther as a soul and doesn't have to haul the baggage. And who else? You. You get to unhook yourself and you don't have to haul the baggage. So what I'd like to say is to open the floor for discussion, yes?
First, let's thank Veronica so much.
Thank you.